In the brothels of ancient Athens, a single night with a woman could cost no more than a couple of barley flatbreads, or even just a jug of cheap wine. These women, known as pornai, weren't seen as people. They were reduced to mere units of trade, owned, branded, and worked until their bodies gave out. Their names didn't matter. Their suffering didn't matter. What mattered was profit, and ancient Athens turned that into a well-oiled machine. While the city praised democracy, philosophy, and the arts, its backstreets told a different story, one of organized human trafficking, state-sanctioned abuse, and normalized violence. The pornai were at the very bottom of this brutal system, often forced to serve 6 to 10 men a day. Yet their daily earnings barely bought a handful of lentils. The brothel owners, however, made small fortunes, part of which went directly into the city's treasury through taxes. Yes, brothels paid taxes, just like merchants and craftsmen. No age was too young for this trade. Archaeological evidence shows that girls were forced into prostitution as early as 10 or 11, some even younger. Their bodies were marked with a brand, usually on the thigh, seared into the skin with hot iron. It was a permanent stamp that said, property. From that moment, they no longer belonged to themselves. If they refused to work, the punishments were swift and savage. Public whippings, days without food or worse. Many of these girls had been sold by desperate parents, sometimes in exchange for a handful of coins, or traded as payment for debts. Others were captured in wars and shipped to Athens from distant lands, Egypt, Thrace, Persia, faces unfamiliar, languages foreign, fear universal. They were stripped, inspected, and auctioned like livestock, their futures determined by the highest bidder. The branding iron was more than just a mark of ownership. It was a sentence, one that declared their lives expendable. The smell of burned flesh, the echo of screams, the laughter of men who called it business. This was how childhood ended. For those who tried to resist, the punishment was designed to make examples of them. Some were dragged into the public square and beaten until they couldn't stand, their tears ignored by crowds that had seen it all before. Others were confined to dark, airless cells until starvation forced obedience. Even the smallest signs of rebellion, a glance held too long, a refusal to smile, were crushed. Survival meant silence, submission, and a face that never betrayed pain. Over time, many forgot the sound of their own names. They became what their owners wanted them to be. Objects, bodies for rent, stories never told. In the alleys of Athens, under the flicker of oil lamps, the walls themselves must have remembered the cries that history chose to forget. There was no kindness in the arrival of a new girl. In fact, it was treated as an event, a twisted initiation, where she'd be publicly assaulted in front of other women and clients alike. One observer from Thessaly wrote that it was meant to crush the spirit, to erase any last trace of resistance. Men paid up to 10 times the usual rate for an untouched girl. Writers of the time spoke of these transactions with chilling casualness, like shopping for ripe fruit at a market stall. Inside the brothels, privacy didn't exist. Women worked in corners of large, crowded rooms, separated only by dirty mats or pieces of cloth. Every cry, every sob, every scream was part of the background noise. For the men waiting their turn, it was entertainment. The atmosphere wasn't hidden or quiet, it was a spectacle. Women were sorted and sold by category. There were the silent ones, the ones who fought back, the exceptionally short, the foreign-born, and those considered unbroken. Each group came with a different price tag, catering to different kinds of appetites. Some 5th century artwork even depicted violent contests, games in which men would compete to subdue women who resisted, all for amusement. Brothel owners learned early how to package suffering into something sellable. The more exotic a woman was perceived to be, the more valuable she became. Nubian women were displayed like rare treasures, their skin fetishized and commodified. Women with physical differences, dwarfs, amputees, or those with speech impairments, were offered up to clients with very specific tastes. Silence in particular was considered desirable. A woman who couldn't scream was seen as a premium experience. Some were kept in chains not for escape prevention, but because the sight of shackled limbs was part of the performance. Girls who had recently arrived and still showed fear or resistance were labeled fresh or untamed. and this alone doubled their price. The idea wasn't just to use them, but to break them. That breaking in the eyes of the customer was part of the appeal. The violence was often ceremonial. Regulars came not just to take, but to watch others take, to observe the shift from struggle to surrender. The psychological domination was just as important as the physical. One record tells of a man who visited weekly, not to touch the women himself, but to sit and watch while others did, saying he enjoyed the transformation. The rooms were often laid out like stages. Mats pulled back, partitions removed, women displayed for viewing before selection. It wasn't sex, it was theater. Every scar told a story. Every bruise was a trophy. And for the men who paid, cruelty was a form of status. The more violent the preference, the wealthier the man was assumed to be. It was all about control. Purchased, performed, perfected. And violence wasn't just tolerated, it was marketed. Some men specifically paid for the right to inflict harm, leaving behind split lips, broken teeth, burns. These weren't rare cases. They were advertised specialties. Women were sold as vessels of suffering. To some, their agony was a kind of art, their screams, a melody to accompany the wine. It wasn't just behind closed doors. During certain religious festivals, especially the Dionysian ones, the violence went public. Prostitutes were offered up to groups of men, free of charge, in what was considered a sacred ritual. Men got drunk, bets were placed, and women were handed over like party favors. These scenes were described in writing with zero shame. Just men having fun under the blessing of the gods. The injuries were brutal: internal bleeding, suffocation, trauma from gang assaults. Some didn't survive the night. Those who did were dragged back to the brothels to keep working. Those who died were dumped outside the city walls like trash, their bodies mingled with animal remains and broken pottery. They didn't get graves, no names, no prayers. There was no mourning, no candles lit, no songs sung, no rites observed. Their deaths were treated like waste removal, necessary, unremarkable, and quick. In some cases, their corpses were stripped of jewelry or garments before disposal, repurposed for the next woman forced into service. Even in death, they were used. The locations where these bodies were discarded became informal dumping grounds with layers of bones built up over the years, testimonies buried under dust and silence. Archaeologists have found shattered skulls with deep fractures, ribs snapped inwards, and jawbones dislocated from violent force. These weren't battlefield wounds. They were wounds of prolonged, sustained brutality inflicted in places that called themselves temples of pleasure. Some women were left half alive, their bodies broken but still breathing, abandoned to the elements until nature or wild animals finished the job. Dogs were known to scavenge the outskirts of the city, dragging limbs through the dirt like discarded meat. There were no tombstones, no funerals, nothing to suggest they had ever lived, let alone mattered. In Athens, a city that immortalized its heroes in marble, the women who built the economy through their suffering were denied even a marker in the dirt. No family was informed, no last words remembered, just a final silence, swallowed by the wind beyond the walls. Their absence was the price of maintaining illusion. If they were acknowledged, the entire structure of glory, gods, and greatness would begin to crack. And so they were erased, deliberately and completely. And yet the bones remain. They lie just beneath the surface, whispering truths that no statue ever dared to tell. And the cruelty didn't end there. Loyal patrons of the brothels were sometimes invited to participate in punishments. One wrong move, spilling wine, crying, mispronouncing a name, and the women would be beaten, locked in dark rooms for days, or forced to stand outside in rain-soaked clothes through freezing winter nights. This was cynically called character correction. There were no special tools for these beatings. Whatever was nearby would do: wooden clubs, wine cups, even the blunt edge of a blade. Over time, the women learned to hide their pain behind forced smiles. Any sign of emotion risked more punishment. In a society that built statues of perfect human beauty, these women became living canvases of bruises, burns, and broken bones. And what happened if one dared to escape? She wasn't seen as a runaway seeking freedom. She was a thief, accused of stealing herself from her owner. The punishment? Public branding on the chest or forehead. Some were nailed to wooden boards and left to die in public squares. Their bodies stayed there as a warning to others. Even temples weren't safe. Women who ran to altars seeking sanctuary were often handed back by priests for a small fee. Their blood would stain the temple floors, wiped clean the next morning by other slaves. Escape didn't just fail, it made life even worse. The justice system had 1,000 ways to break a woman without killing her, and even when they were useful, they were disposable. The market for new girls was cheap. Their lives ended quickly. Most died before reaching 30. Medical notes from the period reveal a horrific truth. When a woman could no longer work, she was tossed aside. Infections, diseases, open sores, none of these stopped owners from forcing them to keep working. A new girl cost less than a doctor visit. Complaints from customers about the smell of rotting flesh were ignored or punished with more violence. Skeletons found near ancient brothels tell the full story. Cracked skulls, broken ribs, disfigured pelvises from repeated abuse in childbirth. Spines twisted from years of strain. These remains tell of a life under relentless assault. Pregnancy wasn't celebrated. It was seen as damage to valuable property. To prevent births, owners forced women to drink poison, beat their stomachs, or made them lift unbearable weights until they miscarried. If those failed, childbirth happened right there, on the same filthy straw where men had used them hours earlier. No midwives, no clean tools, no mercy. Many died in labor. Those who survived had their infants taken, often killed, especially if the baby was female or fathered by another slave. The bones of tiny babies have been found in rubbish heaps and drains behind brothels. Mothers saw killing their child as a final act of mercy, to spare them the same fate. Legally, these women didn't even count as human beings. They were debt slaves, working under made-up fees for food and shelter. Fees that grew daily, trapping them forever. They couldn't refuse a client. Consent simply didn't exist in law. If a woman tried to report abuse, the court wouldn't accept her testimony unless she was tortured first. That was how truth was verified. So in a city that celebrated democracy, half the population, its women, had no place in it at all. Some women did climb slightly higher in this cruel hierarchy. A wealthy patron might take a liking to one and offer a private room, finer clothes, maybe even freedom. But it was all fragile. One bad day, one wrong word, and she'd be back in the common room or worse. Even the favorites were passed around as hospitality, offered to guests like wine cups. In the end, beauty faded, youth disappeared, and the same women who were once cherished were discarded. Those who died didn't receive the usual Greek burial rites. Their bodies were dumped in shallow pits or left among broken dishes and trash. They were denied even the smallest marker of remembrance. In rare cases, a woman might gain her freedom, but society didn't forget her past. She couldn't marry, couldn't join civic life. She became a living ghost, present but erased. Art and literature of the time didn't preserve their pain. Comedies mocked them. Vases painted their abuse. Theater crowds laughed at scenes of assault. Even in death, their stories were turned into jokes or forgotten altogether. And yet the ruins of Athens still whisper their truth. Bones buried with broken pottery, faded graffiti on brothel walls, fragments of lives destroyed for pleasure and profit. These remnants speak louder than any poem or statue. They remind us that for all its glory, ancient Greece built its beauty on the suffering of those it chose to forget. Thank you for staying until the end. If you found this hidden history meaningful, help share it. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Every voice matters, and together we can bring the silent stories back into the light.